Okay, so this is about some massive megalithic spheres, basically. So if you're expecting anything else, you might as well leave. As you can see on the left there, this is actually the first scene, one of the first scenes from the first Indiana Jones film. And people thought it's become kind of like this mythical thing, the idea of these spheres, and everyone relates it to that. But actually, there's an ancient culture in Central America, in Costa Rica, that has hundreds of these spheres. Often, some of them are actually as big as the ones featured in the film. And this is what inspired Steven Spielberg and George Lucas to actually use that as part of the film. But rather than being booby traps, it may actually have other meanings, which I think we'll get into, obviously, in this talk. There's the whole of Costa Rica now has the spheres because they've all moved up from this southern area. It's really around this area here. I mean, you've got San Jose kind of further north, but the stone spheres area is around somewhere called Golfito, Palma Sur and Palma Norte, and also on the islands nearby. There are some 300 have been discovered. And I did a bit of research before I went there, trying to find out if anyone had really been there and I could get exact locations of them, but no one really knew. I asked David Hatcher-Childress, Lee Pennington and various other researchers who've written about them and made videos on them, but alas, not much was to be found. So just before we get into the lecture, I want to show you a quick video I made. It's only like a few minutes long, just about, it's the first in a mini-series I'm just producing myself, editing myself. But I wanted to show you it because I've got film footage of some of the spheres at the San Jose Museum. Many of them have been moved there now. And some of the other strange artifacts there. And I think it's good to see it with a moving camera rather than a still shot for some of them. So I just wanted to show you this first. It's about 5 minutes. And then we'll get into the lecture proper after that. And so this isn't all the spheres down in the south part of Costa Rica just yet. This is just the ones that have been moved from that area in San Jose. There's some other strange statues there. There's these very incredible, intricate carvings, which are some of the things it looks like the stone spheres actually sat on. So I'll just sit down and let you watch this for the next few minutes. So this is one of the megalithic stone spheres in Costa Rica. This is the first one we've come across in the National Museum in San Jose. It's one of many, all found around the entire southwest coast, around Golfito, Palma Sur and Palma Norte, which we're going to be going to on this trip. See if we can find some of them in situ. So this is our introduction to the stone spheres of Costa Rica. Behind me is definitely one of the largest stone spheres we have here in Costa Rica. We're in the Museo Nacional in San Jose. They have several spheres here. I think this is probably the largest one they have. It's about 5.5 feet tall, 5.5 feet round. It's not perfect though. I've looked around it and you can see discrepancies in the spherical shape. However, just to create such things, and so many of them, all around the whole southwest coast of Costa Rica, was quite a remarkable feat, and we have to question, why on earth did they do it? Just looking around it, I don't know if you can see here, but just on the top part here, if we go round with the top part carefully, you can see a few discrepancies in the shape. It's not perfectly spherical. I'm sure if it was measured, the agreements would come forth about that. However, just the sheer size of it, it's quite something to behold. And you can just see from this angle the odd shape of it. So this could well have been one of the ones made by the Chinese megalithic marble makers, and they didn't quite get it right. It's definitely not natural. These have all been tested. They definitely have some man-made quality about them, so we see some kind of training school at work, and it is absolutely fascinating. Many of these spheres were arranged in triangular square patterns over the landscape. Some suggest they could have been navigational markers, even territorial markers or ceremonial markers, who knows. But here they are. There's several of them here in the San Jose National Museum. Just look at the intricacy of these. This is some of the finest stonework I've seen in South or Central America. I've never even seen a picture or a video of these. You have all this kind of incredible animal shamanic symbolism. Even here we have some kind of winged being, winged man, almost looks like a Mothman, with pelicans rising up, holding up the great seat on top. These are said just to be grinding stones, and these are the base of them with all these intricate patterns on them. But look at these, look at this beautiful pattern, knotwork around the whole edge and base, and this is just carved out of one piece of rock with a symbol of a god there with goggle eyes, just like a Tiwanaku. And here we see a very Tiwanaku looking figure holding a staff up to his mouth. Another head inside his mouth. Again, the square features and the sun rays, very similar to Viracocha. Here we just see the legs and how they're beautifully carved. All out of one solid piece of rock. Beautiful craftsmanship to the highest degree. You can deny that this guy's got an amazing hat, or a representation, or even a real elongated skull. And this is one of the remnants of the culture of the gods that once existed here. I mean, just check out these spirals, they're amazing. They're just like the ones in England and Malta, Tiwanaku, all over the world. You can't deny them, that they're there, they are just beautiful. And you can see them all the way up the statue. Symbols. He's even got the goggle eyes, just like we see at Tiwanaku and on Easter Island. I wonder if that's a turban he was originally wearing as well. Pretty amazing, but to me it shows clear signs of oceanic contact and signs of working with earth energies. Maybe this is the people who built and constructed the megalithic spheres. On this particular sphere, we found megalithic carvings that look spiral-like, very similar to what we've seen in different parts of South America and obviously all over the world, such as Malta, England, New Zealand and many other places. Is this a symbol of the builders of these spheres? And this particular sphere has actually been broken open. You can see the other side of it here. So that's basically just a little introduction. Just wanted to show you that so you get some kind of movement around some of these spheres and some of the other artifacts around San Jose. I'm going to be producing a few more of these because we went to many of the sites kind of in situ. And so you can kind of, you know, in the next few weeks I'll be sort of editing those. But the first sort of undertaking of studying these spheres really was when they were discovered by the United Fruit Company. When they went down to Costa Rica to create sort of banana plantations and various other things. Doris Stone, which I think is a remarkably good name, was the first person who, she was a sort of archaeologist who was married to one of the United Fruit Company executives. And she actually published a report in 1943 in American Antiquity, that caught the attention of Samuel Lothrop and his wife from the Peabody Museum in Harvard University. And they came out in 1948 and did the first survey of over about 120 of these spheres. They excavated some of them because many of them were buried within the ground. And you can see them doing the excavations here, and this is them there. And they were kind of sort of getting them out of the ground and other things. The biggest one they found was about 9 feet, and there are suggestions, and there are more being discovered as we speak, actually. And then Matthew Stirling came over. This is the next real excavation, was Matthew Stirling, and he was the guy who really discovered the whole Olmec culture back in the 40s and 50s on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. And interestingly, we'll see a couple of shots later of a stone sphere in Mexico at San Lorenzo, which was actually the capital of the Olmec world. But he was one of the key archaeologists around that time. There's a lot of prehistory of the spheres. There's lots of legends, and we'll go through some of them. But excuse me. It's traditionally believed they were carved between 200 BC and 1500 AD. This is kind of vagueness we get with them. And the method for dating them is quite tricky, because some of them are just literally found on the surface, or they've been moved. There's no strata. And most of the dating has been calculated or guessed at really by stratigraphy, by where they are in the soil and in the the local geology. But there has been pottery found, and it kind of does date back to that kind of era of the Aguas Buenas culture. And there's various other cultures around the whole Diquis Delta, that whole area, which kind of suggests that it was quite widespread in that area. But what fascinates me really about this is the fact that it's fairly confined to one area of Costa Rica. It's all around this kind of southern kind of area, off the islands, Golfito. But Palma Sur and Palma Norte are the key towns to go to, and they're right next to each other, just on either side of the river. But a lot of them have been moved to San Jose. There are a couple of other interesting kind of sites around, in Costa Rica, but the stone spheres are the things that really grab people's attention. So let me, have I just jumped forward there? Yeah, 1 second. So it's really the great explorer, if you want to call him that, Christopher Columbus, on September the 18th, 1502, stumbled across what he thought was India. And actually, this was one of his, I think it was one of his fourth and final voyage. So September the 18th, 1502, he stumbled into the east coast of Costa Rica. And he believed he'd obviously found India, and he went into the land. He met with the local tribes. He was shown their kind of culture. He was even taken to one of the graves of their kings, and he eventually heard stories that on the western side, which is the area we're kind of talking about here, was a great naval culture, which had a different name, and it was like 10 days walk from the eastern side, which is, he came into this area here around Limon. And they didn't, by the time when some of them went over there, they didn't really find any evidence of this naval culture, although the stories were there. And this kind of gives, this is quite interesting, because this is really the thinnest part of, Central America you can get through. And a little bit further south we have the Panama Canal. But Christopher Columbus was, there's nice kind of ideas about who he was and everything, but he actually was quite a mean person. And sort of took people as slaves and used them and this, that and the other. But on the east coast was the realm of the Caribs, and on the further west was the Barucas, Chibchas and the Diquis peoples in the southwest. There were a few 100,000 of them when they turned up. This was the sort of rough estimate, but soon smallpox and other influenza and other things kind of wiped them out pretty much, unfortunately, a bit like what happened in North America and in Mexico and other places. But only a tiny percentage of the actual descendants of the sphere makers really exist anymore. Unfortunately, this is just the nature of what the Westerners, the Europeans do to these cultures. And this just shows you, kind of artist's impression of when that man turned up. But anyway, this is me just at the San Jose Museum, just so you can see the size of the sphere. This is the one that's just outside. If you're going to go to, you have to go to San Jose first. You really want to go to the museum. There's about maybe 10 or 11 spheres there. There was always these legends associated with them, which I found really interesting, that they either had gold in them or they had some kind of treasure inside them. And I got talking to Lee Pennington when I met him when I was up in Wisconsin last October, and he's been to Costa Rica, did some research. We got talking about this. You saw in the video there the sort of black stone, a little black pebble in the middle of that sphere. Now, in some of the spheres, what they found is these small black pebbles, and there's legends that there were coffee beans at the centre of these spheres. So when this one was broken open, and they actually found that, it was quite surprising. So you have to question, how did that get into the centre if it was a natural rock? I mean, did they somehow sort of, somehow psychically see that something was there and then they carved it around that? Or were they cast even? Some suggestions, like people like Joseph Davidovitz and others, suggest that some of these were cast. Which I find quite an interesting idea, but some of this is made of a very hard type of granite. Most of these spheres are slightly different type of granite to what we're used to. But it just shows you some other ones, just other angles of the ones in the museum here. And these are the ones that are just outside, kind of in the garden area of the museum, and it's definitely worth taking a look at them if you're there. Grano Diorite is the kind of, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Mr. Shock, but Grano Diorite is what most of them are made of. So it is a pretty hard, igneous stone that comes out of the nearby Talamanca range of mountains. There's also quite a hard limestone, coquina they call it, which is formed from shell and sand beach deposits, which look quite different. And as we go, I think this one here is probably one of those. And as we went down around the southern part of Costa Rica, you could really tell the difference, and you could see the kind of between the granite style and the limestone style rock. This just shows you some of the strange kind of what I believe they look like they're grinding for grains and things like that. But some of them like this, and there's some other ones which are perfectly circular. It's almost like the spheres were on top of them. And this is how they were found in some cases. This just shows you some of the Lothrop's for early excavation maps. And you can see some of these, it's just a sort of artist's impression of one of these kind of things in the museum. The spheres were actually found with these kind of things that the spheres may have been in. And they've got to understand the spheres range from the size of a tennis ball all the way up to what we see Indiana Jones running away from at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. So there's quite a variation in sizes. So it's hard to get any kind of, it's difficult to find a pattern there. And this just shows you, this is like a top view of that, about where they were found down in the Golfito area. It shows you some detail, which I think is absolutely beautiful. This is made out of the same rock as the spheres, the Grano Diorite. And this is that sphere we saw in the video. This is the one which has got these very strange markings on it, which some people believe is like a star map with spirals and other things. And this here is the small black stone, or the legend of the coffee bean, which is what has come out about it. At the time these were supposedly made 200 to like 200 BC to 1500 AD. There were no known iron tools around at that time by the peoples there, but somehow they worked the stones. It's very hard stone. They worked from a massive sort of square chunk they kind of carved out of the ground, somehow made these perfect spheres out of them. There's obviously connections, these are sort of featured on Ancient Aliens. There's Atlantis Connection. There's been a book written by Ivor Zapp and George Erickson called Atlantis in America, which speculates that this whole area actually was Atlantis down in Costa Rica. And it's a good book. I must admit, and they've gone really into the navigational side and the placement and how they could have been navigational markers. There's other legends that there was some kind of magic potion that was able to soften the rock to make it more easily manipulated. So this could be a reference to some kind of moulding technique applied rather than actually softening the rock. And similar ideas have been put forward about the rocks down in Peru and other places around the world. And the one legend that kind of gets my attention is that the spheres were formed around a coffee bean or nuggets of gold. Because of this legend, about maybe 40 or 50 of the spheres were actually dynamited open, so they could try and find the gold. I don't think they'd do it for coffee, but they're certainly doing it for gold. But no gold was really found, but some of them had these strange black stones in the middle of them, which kind of confused a lot of people, and it's kind of been, no one's really done much research on that. There's other legends that claim they are like marbles of the gods. They're a game for the gods, played by the giants that inhabited the earth, which Robert was obviously talking about last night in Easter Island, which is there are connections, there are kind of similarities with Easter Island as we'll go through the talk. There's also the cosmogony of the Bribri, which is shared by the Cabacers and another group down that way from a few hundred years ago. That they're called Tara's cannonballs. And they were like gods. It was like the thunder gods would fire them through a giant blowpipe to kind of create hurricanes and winds in order to drive out any evil from the lands. So there's all these different ideas about it, which are kind of fascinating when you kind of look into it. This is just a representation. This is, I think, Lothrop and a couple of other people later kind of noticed and thought it may represent certain constellations. And there's another sphere, there's one other sphere like this, in situ, more or less in situ in the area. It was discovered, it was one of the larger ones, which has got a much more elaborate carving on it, with a boat on it, which I think is really interesting, which suggests this naval, this navigational idea. But this is supposed to be exactly, this is like sort of exactly what is on there. Let me just check it out. I mean, it's quite complicated, but it's to do with this. Some people suggest it's Andromeda Galaxy and various other galaxies all represented, but this is pretty much speculation at the moment, but interesting nonetheless. This is just a scene, a clip I just nicked from Ancient Aliens, and they kind of summarised it like this, which is quite a tiny bit inaccurate. This is in the museum again. This is the size of the largest one, even though it's just a flattened piece of rock here now. And there's me standing there, so you can get some kind of aspect of the size. This is one of the ones just in the museum. And these are obviously the fascinating sort of stools that they kind of come on. Then you get these. These are very odd. People just suggest they're funerary kind of tables, which they lay the dead out on. But Ivor Zapp and George Ericsson and a couple of other researchers have kind of agreed upon this, is that they were actually used on the wooden boats, or the balsa wood boats they were using, to ram them in the front of the boat, so then it enables navigators to actually sail against the wind better. This is like an old technique from the Polynesian area. And this is actually, some of these were actually seen by, were shown by the tribes who met Columbus when he first arrived, Christopher Columbus, and they took him to the, and they showed him this. And later it was realised that they were maybe showing one navigator, Christopher Columbus, the ancestors who were navigators back then. So, but it's unclear, it's just sort of speculation put forth. But look at the beautiful stone carving here. You can just see the intricacy all the way around the edge, and it's slightly curved as well. So we're looking at quite high technology to create such things. Now this kind of grabbed my attention, because obviously this is just one of the more flatter pieces of rock, similar to the one we just saw. It's not from a sphere. I don't know why I really put that there, but this is like classic relief carving that we see in other places around the world. I think the most obvious one is that Robert showed a picture of last night, is the one at Göbekli Tepe. In a way, this is a beautiful relief carving, and just to create that is incredibly tricky way to create rock carvings. But it's a very similar style and design to Göbekli Tepe. We also see similar things in Peru. This is at Silustani, around Lake Titicaca. This is one of the chilpas or towers there, and we see another sort of relief carving on the outside. This is also at Silustani. This is just down in the car park next to the museum. They've just thrown a load of these next to this couple of old cars they've dumped there. You sort of see the number plate there. And this is incredible kind of relief carving that's very worn, weathered, but it just shows you that there are connections here. you know, and there are similarities, and you know, there's no conclusions here about this, but at least we're starting to spot these similarities, as Robert and others have been doing already this weekend. This is the statues that were found in the same places as many of the stone spheres. This guy is amazing. Look at that haircut. It's like a punk. Incredible. This is very hard, kind of black, kind of, it looks like diorite. This one's quite weird looking. But this guy here is sort of like a classic representation that we find very similar things in Colombia. But I think the most striking similarity to me is the Urfa Museum, which I think maybe Robert showed a picture of this last night. But you can kind of see, you know, we keep finding these connections, you know, between these different places around the world. And to me, they're like signatures of the ancient people, probably the ancient navigators, leaving their little signs around the world. And I think Costa Rica, I mean, to make those stone spheres is quite a remarkable feat and quite something that is an advanced culture. We see other serpent symbolism. I think this is from Urfa Museum as well, correct me if I'm wrong here. And again, we see serpents carved all over Peru, everywhere, all around on the polygonal stonework. So we see the serpent symbolism, which I believe these were the serpent people. These were the serpent gods who travelled around the world, the Viracochans, the Quetzalcoatl, the Tuatha De Danann, etc., etc., and the Anunnaki and other things like this. So this just shows you one of the spheres in the museum, which I thought was quite interesting because it had a sort of carved hole in it here. Yeah, this is just what we're looking at here. So whether this was done later or whether this was part of it, I just wanted to throw that in there. This is one of the ones just in the park, the local kind of park. You can go and visit. Just kind of walk around town a little bit to kind of see this in San Jose. And they just become, people just take them for granted there now. And so I find it quite strange really when you go there. It's just like sort of pieces of art scattered everywhere around San Jose. But Dr. Hoops, John Hoops, who was the major researcher on this, believes they may have been, you know, a sign of wealth or sort of status, and they were carved for the priestly caste or the kings or the tribal chiefs of that area. Many of the stones are obviously in danger because they've just been taken by rich people and put in their gardens. But only, I think John Hoops managed to account for 186 of them, but there are said to be at least 300 in the whole area. This just shows you, we just went for a little walk to go and catch a bus to go south to Palma Sur. This was near the bus station. I thought this was quite cool. Someone had done this beautiful mural on the side of this doctor's surgery. And then we basically got a bus and we headed from San Jose around here, like I think it was like a 6 or 7 hour trip down to Palma Sur. And I didn't know anyone who's actually ever been there. So we were just winging it a little bit. There's hardly anything online about where these spheres are. So we kind of just, you know, and even Lonely Planet and the guidebooks don't give you any information. There's nothing there. They just mention, there's a couple in Palma Sur, a couple in Palma Norte, one in Golfita, and that's it. They don't give you any location. So we were kind of like just winging it, and we went down there to see what we could find, kind of questing really, if you like. And this is the river. There's two sides, there's Palma Sur and there's Palma Norte, which is south, north kind of thing. And you have to cross the river to get to the two areas. There's spheres in both of them. The only place you can stay is Palma Sur. And this is just a beautiful, lush countryside you get around there. This is one we just found outside a restaurant. You can just see this, it's just outside a Chinese restaurant in Palma Sur. So this is kind of, you know, you just walk about and you find them. This is kind of the fun part of it, really. I did take GPS readings of them all, and I'm going to, you know, do an article about it at some point. This is actually in the college, the technical college, and we spotted this because we were staying just down the road, just out of town, at this these kind of shacks, really. And luckily, we didn't know where the spheres were, but we had to walk past the college to get there and back. And we spotted this one. And we were like, oh, good, we found one of the smaller spheres. Fantastic. So we got chatting with the guy, you know, sort of, you know, English to a Spanish-speaking person. And he said, oh, no, come in, there's something to look at. I was like, okay, all right, cool. Is there another little sphere somewhere? There wasn't a little sphere, there was two of the biggest spheres there are. just hidden behind these kind of corrugated iron sort of fences. And we were like, oh, thank God we spoke to him, because we wouldn't have spotted them. This is Sheena, my lovely lady friend, girlfriend, who's just next to one of the spheres. She's a bit shorter than me, so it makes it look bigger, whereas I make it look really small. But you can see the size of them. This is the one on sort of to the left. This is the one to the right. There's two there, and these looked almost perfect. I couldn't see really any discrepancies on one of these. There was a couple, maybe a minor discrepancy on one of them, but it was just kind of one of those stunning things you see. Just imagine when it was just pure kind of countryside landscape and they were just sitting there. It is really like kind of strange and mystical seeing something like that. If you were a traveller and you just stumble across something like that, you go, oh my God. You would think giants were involved in it. This is our friend who let us in and kind of showed us this. But yeah, these are remarkable really. And they're just behind corrugated iron fences because they're like doing some building work at the college. And this is, I took GPS readings and all this kind of stuff, which I'm going to analyse eventually, see if there's any things there. But there is some research done on the placement and location of them. But the problem is, all the ones that are above the surface have been moved, pretty much. So it's really tricky to have any meaning to their placement, any geodesy or the geomancy or any alignments between them, because they've all been moved, unfortunately. These are just in the park in Palma Sur. There's four of these. There's one on each corner of this square park. Here, and there's, kind of surround the park. It's close up of one of them. This is our driver, Manuel, who we got, luckily we stumbled across him, and he was just like the best guy ever. And he tried to sell us everything, basically, and including these things. We paid him quite well. We had a whole day out with him, and it was the funnest day we had in Costa Rica, to be honest. It was brilliant. So if you get the right driver, and they know he knew where everything was. He knew all the obscure sites. So we kind of, synchronized and met him. And he took us around for a whole day, 2 days, in fact. Again, we were in what we just looked at was Palma Sur, and then we go over the river to Palma Norte. There's no hotels there, so don't even try and stay there. And here we have a sphere just next to an old train, which I thought was quite a nice shot. Again, there's a whole garden of spheres here. There's a whole park of spheres. This is another one. This one's been sort of pieced back together because this is one of the ones that was destroyed or dynamited to see what was in it. Then you have these beautiful trees that look like they've been painted with multiple colours, which are all in the area of the spheres. So this is the Park of the Spheres. There's several in the park, including that one, obviously. Yep, it's just going to be loads more of this now for the next 20 minutes, really. So just loads of spheres. But this is one of the ones which is made of that kind of limestone, and you can see this sort of rough side of it, which I thought was quite interesting. Whether it was unfinished or whether it looks like it's just weathering because it's like a softer type of rock. You can kind of see that from the side here a bit better. And there are a few others like this, but some suggest, there are many people who suggest this nowadays, that everything is kind of cast out of, but then you've got to make a perfectly spherical cast somehow. And get the sort of molten rock inside there. This is just an artist's representation of how they could have done it. But then it's going to be easier to make that than it is probably to make these. So it kind of defeats the object a little bit. And it's just sort of an idea of molten rock and everything. As you go out of Palma Norte and you head, I think, slightly north, we wanted to go to this place called Finca 6. Which was famously is where many of the spheres are still in situ, still buried in the ground, with parts of them sticking out. But on the way there, we came across this, and this is just like a corner area with some farm over there. And here, there's just a couple of spheres that have been exploded, really, and cut open. This is like a slice of one of them, which has been put upright, which is kind of odd. And here's just a few spheres. There's me kind of filming them. And here's just, a few more different shots so you get an idea of it. And again, we have this kind of rough-hewn edge on one of them again. And But this looks like a different type of rock. It's not the sort of more, it looks a bit more grey than the limestone that had a similar kind of rough effect on it. This is one of the ones that's just been split open. This has been here for probably like 50 years like this, so the weathering has even started to affect it as well. This is an earlier photo someone else took before the grass had grown over them. That part went on there kind of thing. So you can see how it is without all the long grass there. Yep, another one. And then there's this strange kind of cut on here. So whether this was part, sort of part of the process of constructing them, whether it's just a later thing when they were trying to split it open, and we're not too sure. And here's just a close-up of the sort of split open one, which looks remarkably like the kind of rock we see at Avebury to me. It kind of looked remarkably similar, whereas that's the more granite-looking rock. But anyway, we eventually made it to Finca 6, which is probably about 10 miles out the way of Palma Norte and Palma Sur. And they're actually turning this now into an archaeological kind of tourist site. Haven't actually done that yet. So when we turned up, there were all workers there. They were looking at us funny, and we were like a bit worried. But luckily, our driver kind of spoke to them, sort of dealt with it. And it's just a couple of the finds they found there recently. There was a whole culture there, a whole kind of village, almost like a town. Some of the spheres were placed outside, like there were 2 spheres outside the sort of entrance to some of the more, what they think are the royal kind of areas where they lived. And here's just some of the mounds that are left where some of the settlement was. So we are here right now. And here we can see these spheres didn't form into this circle. They were found and then put into this one little area. So don't get excited. That's not a stone sphere circle. But these ones are in situ, and so are these ones have been moved now as well, unfortunately. And this is where several other ones were found that have now been moved. But this is where several of them are now placed. So whenever they find spheres nowadays, they all take them to Finca 6 and put them into this area here. And these are the 2 main areas of living areas, which they believe were like the priestly caste or the kind of leaders of the area. This whole area was kind of inhabited. So this is like almost like the center of the stone producing people. And I think it was like a multifunctional site as well. Here's just some of the smaller stones that made up some of the living quarters. And here's just a short film. We don't need any sound for this or anything. Just show, this is like, it is a banana plantation. The United Fruit Company are still involved in this. And I just thought it was quite fun to get a little bit of this on film. It's kind of weird when you're sort of just looking at spheres and suddenly these bananas kind of all... when they first went by, the guy was out of shot already because he's like 20 feet ahead of the bananas. And we were like, how are these bananas moving? And, so this is where a lot of our bananas come from, funnily enough. Probably one you have for breakfast. Could well be that. So yeah, sort of show some appreciation of that. So this is like the area, as me sort of half naked, so calm down. This is the area where some of the spheres are now being placed. They kind of just keep them in this kind of small field. There are many thinkers now. They're sort of marking them out properly about where any ones they find in situ, they try and keep them there now. They don't move them. There's several other farms. They've discovered them one in the whole area. So fortunately, there's a bit more kind of organisational skill with them nowadays, so they are being protected. I just took GPS readings because that's kind of what I like to get up to. And this one they think maybe is in situ still. This is like another field there. Now these ones definitely are. These are buried deep in the ground. And so there's some interesting alignments with some of these. We'll have a look at. We'll have a look at shortly. So I'm just checking my notes here. Yeah. And this is just one of the top part of one of them, which has been chipped slightly. And these are the kind of channels. They think they had buildings upon these parts. And these were for water and things like this. Again, here's another one just sticking out of the ground. There's about 3 or 4 of them up there. We'll have a look at some maps of how they were discovered shortly. Now this is El Silencio. This is another finca, or Rancho El Silencio, which is about 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes from Finca 6. This is the largest stone sphere that's ever been discovered, but it's been pretty badly damaged. They're not sure if this is in situ, because it may have rolled down the hill, but this was actually quite high up on a kind of ledge kind of thing. And this was found in the undergrowth nearby. Sort of formerly it was like an archaeological site which people could visit, but now it's all private kind of land. You're not supposed to visit there. This is John Hoops actually at that stone, so you can see the kind of size of it. And it's also him again. So I just want to reference him because he's one of the key researchers really. He's got a lot of very interesting information online if you want to look him up. And then there's this kind of place where many of the spheres are put as well. This is another place. It's another sort of 10 minutes back towards Palma Sur. And this is where one of the most interesting spheres is, this one, which we'll have a close-up of shortly, which has got these carvings on it, and they look like boats. And you can just see this, like I said, there's just lots and lots of spheres to look at. And, there's Sheena with the sphere. This one is actually the one with the boat on it. You can't see it that clearly, and no one's actually researched this, documented this, and drawn it all up yet. So this is like kind of new stuff. But luckily our guy there, that's just one of the spirals on it, and then there's like a boat kind of picture underneath it. You might be able to see it better on here. There you go, you can kind of see this boat. It's got these sort of bits coming out, there's like a sail on it. Difficult to see here. I'm probably going to have a go. I took hundreds of photos of this, and I'm going to try and do an artist's impression of this at some point for the video I'm going to make. Just to see if we can, because no one's actually drawn this up yet that I'm aware of. Here's just some other shots of it. You can kind of see the shape of the boat here. So it does suggest that maybe they were a naval culture, and this was the thinnest part of Central America, suggesting that there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. And that shows you just the size of it. And there's part of the boat picture there with the spirals and other things on it. So we spent a bit of time there. Again, this is vital. If you want to go and look at these spheres, you have to find Manuel, and he'll drive you about. And I'll give you his number if you need it. And he speaks English. So as we were kind of hanging about in Palma Sur, we just decided to walk around and go in people's gardens and things like this. I actually got caught going in someone's garden and had to explain myself while I was filming in their garden with a camera. So that was kind of fun. They don't have many guns there, so that's all right really. But this is one I found. This was actually in a kind of small hotel, sort of shacks you can stay in. I think that's probably the same one. And this is our friend Manuel. So if you go down there, that's what he looks like. You'll find him. But there's literally just some of them are in people's. You can just sort of look over the fence, off the street, and they're there, and they let you in. You can photograph them and touch them and things. Then, as we were kind of heading back, we spotted a couple on the side of the road next to this pizza place. We've already seen some at a Chinese place as well, so a bit of variety there. These are like the sort of more limestone ones. This just shows you, this is the whole map, this is the whole area where they've really been discovered. And thanks to John Hoops and others, they're actually marking where these are. So we've got Finca 6 here, which is where we were, this whole area here, but there's others found. Most of them have been moved now, but there are discoveries still being made. And this is one of the latest discoveries, actually. This is a photo of one of the latest excavations that was happening last year on the Osa Canton area. But they were just digging drainage canals in the area around the museum, quite away from Finca 6, but that kind of area. But this is because of all these new discoveries and the realization that this is important stuff. UNESCO have got involved, and it's going to be a proper big archaeological site. You probably have to pay to go into it and things like this, but at least it's being preserved and protected, and the spheres are staying in situ, and they're kind of doing what they can to accommodate that, because it's just not been like that there, basically. It's just been pretty random. Most people just look at the ones in San Jose Museum. But these are the configurations they kind of come in when they were discovered. This is actually at Finca 6. Two of these they're in the museum now, and I think these two are in the museum now. So unfortunately they're not, but luckily John Hoops, he did actually record where they were. And this is where Ivor Zapp and George Erickson in their book Atlantis in America, when you extend these alignments, They do kind of go over to Europe, which he suggests they may link with Stonehenge. There's other ones that go towards Easter Island, but when you actually get on Google Earth, or start doing a bit of proper data research, it's not that accurate really, but it's an idea. And it would be useful for navigators to know where they're going. And similar ideas are found in certain islands in the Pacific, in the South Pacific, where they had these spheres, they had these stones marked across the landscape, so they were directional markers of where you need to sail. But I think they were a bit more, it's kind of to me it sounds kind of vague, so I'm a little bit unsure about that whole theory. But these ones that go in straight lines obviously fascinate any late hunter that might be here. Some of them were in dead straight lines. It wasn't this long, this was kind of a small area, just a few feet, 30 feet long or something. But the spheres were in alignment to each other. So whether that had a meaning to them, or whether it was just because it looked nice and neat and tidy, or whether it was a ley line. But this one here is actually pretty much, dead straight, and I find that quite interesting, really. And you can see this is the area we looked at, the whole Finca 6 area, and if you extend the alignment, things do start connecting up. Again, this is all kind of speculative because so many of them have now been moved. Here just shows you the arrangement of some of them. This was actually Doris Stone's original research when she discovered them back in the 40s. This is more here. This is Farm 4. This is one of the other farms where some were discovered. They've mostly been moved now. It just shows you the spacing of them. And here as well, the small black dots, where you'll find these. Now there are, this was from Ancient Aliens, and they, some people suggest they were like representing planets or other, like the sun, the moon, and even stars, sort of mapped on the landscape. But again, when you look at it, it doesn't all quite fit together. It's kind of like a nice idea, and it kind of, there could be some astronomical events happening. Some of the alignments do seem to match some sunrises and sunsets. Some do match moon rises and moon sets, but it's quite vague. It's not the accuracy we saw when, obviously with Alexander Thom and others. But I think the research is starting to be done on that, but there's so little data to work from because most of them have been moved, like I said. However, so we've got some idea. I've shown you as many of the spheres as I could. We managed to see, I think, 60 spheres, and I think most of them were shown on there. So I'm just going to go through around the world a little bit now. I'll show you some other spheres around the world. Now, most of the other ones around the world are natural kind of spheres, but it's just nice to put them in context with the ones we've seen here. Now, obviously, there's these ones in Bosnia. These are the ones in Costa Rica, and obviously these are the ones that are being found in Bosnia. From some angles, they look kind of perfect. I went to visit these down in, I think back in 2011, we did a little trip there. And this is Zavidovici area around here, and this is like this is like the sort of official kind of stance on this. I think Robert's been out there, and Andre and a few others have been out there. Here's some of the ones. This is one of the ones in one of the towns nearby, and these are the ones sort of in situ in this strange valley. Again, officially, some of the spheres are made from the Grano Diorite again, which is kind of interesting, but they do seem kind of natural. I'm sure Robert, maybe in the forum, we can sort of talk about some of the comparisons here. That's our friend Matt who came with us. He was here at Megalithomania a couple of years ago. There's Mr. Osmanagic and his friend hanging about. But anyway, there's a big debate about this, so I'm not going to sort of define these as carved spheres or whether they're natural or not. But I just wanted to show you different examples around the world, really. These are the ones that there's actually one or two that have been discovered in Serbia as well, and these are some of the carvings found on them. Again, these aren't perfect, and it's unclear whether they're carved or natural. There's not really too much research on these. Even in Italy, there's like this guy has found them on his farm as well. So whether these were just worked with by people at random parts of history, or whether they are part of some potential global network, like signatures of the gods, we really don't know. But I thought I'd throw it in there. These are more like eggs, sort of weird shaped ones in Sardinia. I'm just sort of taking these off a couple of websites I was looking at on the internet, doing a bit of research. And even in France we get some as well, which seem to be natural kind of, natural sort of forming out of the rock, as you can see here. I'm not sure exactly where in France that is actually. And then the more famous ones are in New Zealand. These are on the coast, or the Moeraki boulders, I think they're called. And there's quite a lot of these all on the coast, and they're kind of beautifully placed and have the water flowing over them and all nice things like that. But again, these appear to be natural according to researchers. You can just see some other examples here. I won't go into too many details about them. But even in China, there's been discoveries as well, which kind of stunned a few people. This one looks pretty spherical actually, but there's some brilliant, amazing stonework in China, which they're pretty good at, right up to relatively recently. But another one I spotted when I was traveling was this one in San Lorenzo, which I mentioned earlier, in Mexico. And this is, although it's not, obviously you can see it's not a perfect sphere, it's more like quite a bad sphere actually. This Olmec head, on the other hand, is quite remarkable. And you can see the intricacy of the stonework in Mexico does match that of Costa Rica. And there are suggestions that the connection between South and Central and America is actually very valid. The Olmecs did go quite far south, and the Viracochans or the Tiwanakuns from South America in Peru, Bolivia did travel up north. And I'm sort of developing various theories about that. I've been looking at, obviously last year we looked at Colombia, and also Chavin in central North Peru. And you kind of can't help but notice there does seem like a stream of kind of knowledge and culture that stretches between these different countries. And also just recently at Teotihuacan in Mexico, there's been these strange, what may have been metallic spheres that have been found in the pyramid of Kukulkan, or the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, who was the sort of ancient god of that area, not that, fairly close to the Olmec area. And so this is literally like a few weeks ago this was being discovered. And obviously, as we saw last night, it's just me and Robert posing there, and this is sort of egg or sphere that were moved to this part of Easter Island as well. And so we do see this, potentially, although this is supposed to be like the naval area even though it's on the coast, this is potentially what we see in other parts of the Pacific, which is like these stones they use as navigational tools. And also, here's one I found in Quincy, Massachusetts. But this is like a modern one, very modern. It was actually done about 40 years ago, I think, and I couldn't help but try and push it off its pedestal and roll it down the street, cause chaos, but I couldn't, I tried. So even when they're spheres, people think, oh yeah, you can easily roll them about, but they're not that easy to push around, even the ones sitting on the surface. Even when they're about this big, you try and push those about, they're pretty heavy. But anyway, so thank you very much for listening.